also how whining works. If your kid, Mommy, can I have a cookie, 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 can I have a cookie? Eventually you give the kid a cookie, right? Because you want, what you're responding to actually is negative reinforcement, stopping of a negative experience. What the kid is responding to is positive reinforcement of that particular behavior. Eventually you're going to give the kid a cookie. They know they wear you down to a nub and you're going to give them that cookie. All right? However, you can't do it. Don't give them the cookie, because intermittent schedule of positive reinforcement will strengthen that behavior. So, in the beginning of asking people to do things or remember things, give them continuous positive reinforcement for that particular task. Then, over time, switch it up to intermittent schedule of reinforcement to strengthen that response. I know I'm going to get something good out of this. I know if I just keep doing it, I'll get something good. Okay? So that's another way. Okay, so where are some other resources for help? Because we're probably nearly out of time. Or it's time for questions, that sort of stuff. How can I learn more? Well, Deborah Tannen is always a good resource. Mark Gungor is really a funny resource and an interesting marital therapist / comedian. And John Gottman is a fabulous cognitive behavioral therapist out of Seattle, I believe, and he has some wonderful books on marriage connection and how to help couples communicate and learn how to understand one another. You can go to a communication skills training class. There's couples counseling. A big part of couples counseling is learning how to talk to each other. Another part is if you have an employee assistance program, contact them. They may have some resources for you. Your health insurance provider can give you some referrals. There's also the physician referral line for a therapist in the area who might be able to help you as you sort of navigate these gendered communication lines. So, what are some questions that people have from the audience? Yes, sir.
Just a couple of comments. When you talk about men's minds being linear, I got a couple degrees in engineering. I was a manager with Bell South for a number of years, and I saw, engineers are a little bit OC and such also, but they are that linear thinking.
Right.
And more when I was in college, there's all guys in engineering school.
Right.
But as I saw more and more women coming to work for me as engineers, I saw that same thinking, that same linear process in their minds.
Right.
And then also when you talked about
so you're asking why is that happening?
Yeah. I mean,
because
obviously they're not always alike, but they
right.
have similar traits that make, I think.
So part of this is that there are individual differences. The other part is that men and women don't fall strictly along these gendered lines. The other part is that women who are more linear thinkers were probably not given the opportunity to enter engineering school when you entered engineering school. But now, if they make the grades, if they are able to handle the coursework, they can move through engineering school just as well as their male counterparts. So you're going to find that people self-select, usually, hopefully, that's what we hope for, right, in their occupational life, for what is more conducive to their own way of thinking or being in the world. So that makes sense, that you saw that those women who were in the field with you had a more linear thought process. And it's just about individual differences between men and women and within men and women. And you had another question, sir.
Just talking about that one process, we talked about how you handle people, communicating positive reinforcement. All excellent management skills for managing groups of people. As a manager for over 30-some years, I've fired people and given them positive reinforcement, saying this will be a better thing for you because you'll find a profession without that. And they were bad engineers. But I said, well, your skills, you need to look into something else. And I try always to get that across to people. And sometimes I've had people blame me for that kind of stuff. Usually they were a little upset, but
yes, being fired is upsetting.
yeah.
And the interesting thing is, even though that was an upsetting experience, they probably remembered a lot of the components of the experience because it was so upsetting. So you pairing the negative experience of being fired with particular constructive feedback and advice may help them remember that feedback and advice more easily. You may not want to have that as your standard way of helping people remember things, but that probably was
Didn't
pretty
have to do that
interesting.
many.
Yeah. Yes, ma'am. You had a question.
I did, and I don't know if this is, if we didn't cover it, but I remember learning at some point the corpus callosum in women is bidirectional, whereas women is unidirectional, which the way they explained it to me is that if I watched a horror flick, I can't separate myself from the fact that it's really cool special effects at the end. Is that, did I understand that right? Do I have that down? Am I confusing things?
Well, I mean, that's a pretty broad statement that the corpus callosum in men is one way and it's another in women. There may be more bidirectional pathways in women than there are in men.
Right.
But the corpus callosum connects both parts of the brain, and thus, in all people, must be bidirectional. It must
Right,
go
but for men
back
it
and
has to
forth.
take turns, but for women it can run at the same time.
You know, I'm not familiar
Maybe
with
not?
that line of
Okay.
research. That would be an interesting thing for me to find out more about. I'll look that up.
I've been used to look that, I was understood.
Okay, awesome. Thank you. Yes.
You're a new mother, I'm a relatively new mother, and I've found that, I mean, ever since the moment I was pregnant, I had to suddenly use to-do lists, whereas I never had to do that before. And I was just wondering if there are theories behind that whole process. And
Oh, there are a number of theories. What's right and what's wrong is always up for question. So some people will say, oh, no, it's, your hormonal surge is interfering with your remembering of things. It's your physical level of exhaustion that's interfering with things. It's now the increased number of things you have to do. I'm not sure what it is for you, but I find that for me, it's the sheer exhaustion and the increase in the number of things I have to do every day.
Yeah.
And a lot of part of it seems to me, or what I'm learning on a more intimate level these days, is that much of the work of parenting on a daily basis does fall to women, and that men, when they do things, it's often considered help instead of parenting, right? So this is a sort of a societal tide against which I would ask most women to fight, but at the same time, it's present nevertheless. So yes, I have to use reminders for myself as well, and I think it's really just about the sheer volume increase in tasks as well as the sleep deprivation. I don't know if that ends, I hope.
It ends.
But that would be nice to know about. Yes.
So your question about memory, so I also was a mom and I had that issue, but it was a long time ago as well.
Mhm.
And I find like when I met my husband, he always remembered stuff and I found that very attractive. Like he met my family and he could remember all these stories about my family. I barely can remember what year he's born and where, and so it's an ongoing thing. And so now that I'm teaching my son, like history has always been an issue. So like you're saying as a female, you find your memory isn't as tip-top as maybe many women's memory should be. And I'm wondering, what can, is it something to accept about oneself? My memory just isn't good. It's not that I don't care about you when you tell me stories. I'm interested in the moment. But then a moment later, it's just not there anymore. If there's something I can do if that's a good thing, if that's not a good thing, but I'm just wondering what to do with that information.
Okay. Repeat. Repetition is always helpful for memory. One of the reasons that women are often pointed to as people who remember the stories the best, even though it may or may not be true, is that they repeat the story. A lot of times women are more communicative about a particular social experience than men will be, right? And so they will tell their girlfriend about, you'll never believe what I heard about. And that reinforces those memory pathways. Then writing the story down. If you find it to be something, if you think to yourself, self really ought to commit this to memory somehow. You choose a particular number of things to really commit to memory. Talk about it to somebody else, write it down, and then set a reminder for yourself to go back and look at what you've written down. And if you look at something 3, 4, 5 times, talk about it 3 or 4 or 5 times, you'll probably remember that better. What we have to be careful about is knowing that memory is reconstructive. It is not a DVD that we plug into our mind's DVD player and play back without error. We will reconstruct the events of our lives as we piece them together, because information lives in different parts of your brain that all has to come together and be synthesized. We also tend to remember that which is more emotionally salient. So a particular component of the experience might be more important for you than, let's say, your husband. So you're going to remember that more. That's going to color your recall, and then that's going to change the story when you retell it. This is a normal, natural part of being a human being, but it's something to pay attention to, that your memory is going to be fallible, and you will make mistakes, which is one of the reasons that eyewitness testimony is less reliable than collateral evidence, usually, in court cases. Yes, ma'am?
How would you define linear thought processes as opposed to nonlinear?
As opposed to like a connectivity process?
Non-linear.
Right, nonlinear. So linear means moving from one piece of information to the next logical piece of information. So from A to B, without stopping off in between. Whereas nonlinear is sort of bouncing around the information before you get to your final destination. So you can think of it as like a direct flight versus one with connections, right? So in order for me to get to LA from Miami, I can choose a flight that flies directly to LA, or I can stop off in Atlanta. So that would be another, like a metaphor for a nonlinear.
Now, what was the other one that you just mentioned?